Learning outcome 2, respiratory system. The respiratory system. Respiration is the vital exchange of gases between the animal and its environment. This needs to take place in order for the body to take on board oxygen from the air. We term this inspiration, and then we also need for the body to be able to excrete and remove into the air the carbon dioxide within our body, and we term this expiration. The respiratory tract, in simple terms, is a pathway in which inspired and expired gases travel to and from the area where gaseous exchange takes place in the lung tissue. The respiratory system or respiratory tract is located within the chest or thoracic cavity and is made up of the following parts: the nose and nasal chambers, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi and the bronchioles, and then finally the lungs. The respiratory tract is divided into upper and lower parts. Within the upper respiratory tract, we have the nose, including the nasal cavity and the sinuses, the pharynx, the larynx and the trachea. The lower respiratory tract is made up of the bronchi, the bronchioles and alveoli. The image provided shows you the anatomy of the upper respiratory tract, showing the position of not only sinuses, the nasal cavity and also turbinates, the hard palate, the tongue, soft palate, epiglottis, larynx, pharynx and trachea, and also the location of the esophagus. The journey of inspired air. Inspired air enters the respiratory system through the nose, through the nostrils, or if we appropriately term them, the external nares, and this leads onwards into the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity is divided by a cartilaginous septum that divides it into the right and left nasal chambers. Entrance to the nasal cavity is protected by a hairless pad of epidermis made up of a thick layer of stratified squamous epithelium, and we term that the rhinarium. The right and left nasal chambers also contain fine scrolls of bone that are termed the nasal turbinates or conchi. They are covered by ciliated mucous epithelium and have a good blood supply due to blood capillary supply to the area. Within the nasal chambers at the back, there is a mucous epithelium that covers the turbinates. It has a rich supply of sensory nerve endings. These are responsive to smell, and we term this the olfactory region. This will relate to when you've covered special senses. A function of the turbinates and the ciliated mucous epithelium is to moisten and warm incoming air as it passes over them. The cilia and mucus also assist in trapping any particles that can be inspired and waft them back to the back of the nasal cavity to pass onwards to the pharynx and to then be swallowed. Thus, the result is that the inspired air is warm and moist. It doesn't contain any potentially harmful particles, and the purpose of that is to help to prevent the remainder of the respiratory system from any harm occurring. Sinuses, also referred to as the paranasal sinuses. A sinus is an air-filled cavity found within a bone. These lie within the facial bones of the skull. Again, they are lined with ciliated mucous epithelium, and they communicate with the nasal cavity through narrow openings. Within the dog, we have a sinus that is not classed as a true sinus, and we term that the maxillary. It's described as a recess at the caudal aspect of the nasal cavity. We also have the frontal sinus, and this lies within the frontal bone of the skull. The function of sinus is to lighten the weight of the skull, areas of the skull that are required for muscle attachment to be made larger, and act as areas where heat exchange can take place, and they are also a site for mucus secretion. The pharynx. Onwards from the nasal cavity, inspired air passes into the area known as the pharynx. This is the area at the back of the mouth, and it is shared by both the respiratory and the digestive system. It is divided into dorsal and ventral parts. Dorsally it is termed the nasopharynx. Ventrally it is termed the oropharynx. This division is brought about by the partition, which is musculomembranous in nature and is commonly called the soft palate. The nasopharynx is key to the respiratory system, and its role is to convey inspired air from the nasal cavity to the larynx. Located within the pharynx, we also have the pair of eustachian, or commonly termed auditory tubes, that open into the pharynx and connect the pharynx to the middle ear. The larynx. Inspired air will enter this area. It's found corded to the pharynx in the space between the two halves of the mandible. Its function is to enable regulation of gases that flow into the respiratory system or tract. It prevents anything that isn't a gas from entering, so think of it as a type of bodyguard. It's suspended from the skull by the hyoid apparatus, and found within the larynx is the pair of vocal ligaments. The covering of the inner surface of said ligaments is with a mucous membrane that forms the vocal folds. When air moves past these folds, it causes them to vibrate, and thus sound is produced. I would like for you to research the purpose of the epiglottis and produce a document for your veterinary educationalist to mark. The trachea. Onwards on its journey now, air enters the trachea. It is located on the ventral aspect of the neck, below and slightly to the right of the esophagus. It extends along the length of the neck. It passes through the thoracic inlet, and it is the long tube, and it is permanently open, that links the trachea to the Y-shaped end known as the bifurcation. It is covered with ciliated mucosa which sweeps debris out of the tract. This is a primary defence mechanism. Bronchi and bronchioles. The trachea bifurcates. It divides into the left and right bronchi, thus entering the relevant lung. The bronchi. Each bronchus forms the entrance to the lung. When entering, they branch off into smaller tubes, which we term the bronchioles. This is known as a bronchiole tree. Bronchioles continue to get smaller, branching passages and spread throughout the lungs. Smooth muscle, under the control of the autonomic nervous system, make up the walls of the bronchi and bronchioles. The smallest size or diameter of said branches are known as the alveolar ducts and lead to the alveoli. The respiratory passages have the capacity to dilate. This enables a larger or greater volume of air to reach the lungs. Question: when do you think this may take place? When an animal is trying to take air on board. So, for example, if they are hot, we class this as hyperventilation. It's just one case. Not only will it actually allow the area to dilate and let such a larger volume be taken on board, but then also this area will constrict back down to normal size to allow for normal breathing. Alveoli. The alveolar ducts end as the alveolar sacs. They resemble a bunch of grapes. Each sac comprises of a large number of alveoli. These are millions in their number within the lungs, and they are made of a very thin wall, and we term that the pulmonary membrane. They're surrounded by a network of capillaries. These thin-walled pulmonary membranes allow for gas exchange within the blood to occur. The O2 in the inspired air diffuses across the pulmonary membrane of the alveolus into the blood within the capillaries. Simultaneously, the CO2 is exchanged from the blood via that membrane, which then goes on to enable it to be excreted when the air is expired. The lungs. The lungs lie within the thoracic cavity, on either side of the double layer of connective tissue, which is known as the mediastinum. This contains the air passages, blood vessels, and surrounding connective tissue. All are enclosed by the pulmonary pleura or membrane, and they are divided into well-defined lobes that are demarcated by deep fissures. The lungs. The right lung has 4 lobes: the apical or cranial, the cardiac or middle, the accessory lobe, and the diaphragmatic or caudal lobe. The left has only 3 lobes: apical, the cardiac, and diaphragmatic. The thoracic cavity, also known as the thorax. Most cranes are the 3 body cavities formed by the ribs, sternum, diaphragm, and thoracic vertebrae. It contains the heart and associated vessels, lungs, trachea, and esophagus. Is divided into the right and left pleural cavities. Each has a lining of a single layer of serous membrane known as the pleural membrane. The pleural membrane is responsible for secreting a small amount of serous or watery fluid, the function of which is to prevent friction being caused between the pleural surfaces whilst the lungs move during respiration. Please watch the provided respiratory system video, which gives you an overview of the system for you to be able to watch to take it in another context.